The camera opens on a medieval marketplace. Bustling merchants. Children chasing each other. The smell of roasted meat and smoke rising from iron forges. Then, slowly, the chatter dies. The crowd's attention shifts to a figure making his way down the muddy road. His hood is drawn low, his hand hidden beneath cloth wrappings. The jingle of a small wooden clapper rattles in the air. Mothers grab their children. Merchants step back, pulling their wares closer. He does not speak. He doesn't need to. His very presence announces his crime against nature, leprosy, in medieval Europe. To be branded a leper was to be marked as something less than human. To many, the disease was not just physical. It was spiritual punishment. Some saw it as divine wrath for sin, others as a living curse that spread through breath, touch, or even sight. A man with lesions on his skin could be cast out in an instant, banished from family, from work, from the very fabric of society. The church often presided over a grotesque ritual, the living funeral. A leper was led to the altar, covered in black cloth as priests recited prayers reserved for the dead. A handful of dirt was sprinkled over his head, as if burying him alive in front of the entire congregation. When the ceremony ended, the leper was declared dead to the world of the healthy. From that moment on, he belonged to the shadows, exiled to a leper colony, a place feared more than the plague itself. Imagine the outskirts of a medieval town. Past the farms and fields, near the riverbanks, or deep in the woods, stood a place few dare to visit, the leprosarium. Surrounded by crumbling stone walls or rotting wooden fences, these colonies were half prison, half hospital, but in truth, they were death sentences. The lepers lived in huts or narrow dormitories, their bodies slowly disfiguring. Fingers curling into claws, noses collapsing into gaping wounds, eyes clouded with blindness. The stench of rotting flesh clung to the air. Food was tossed over walls, delivered by monks who dared not cross too close. Water, often stagnant, carried disease rather than cured it. Inside, the inhabitants formed their own twisted society. Some prayed endlessly, begging God for a miracle. Others gave up all hope, turning feral in their desperation. Many colonies had chapels, for the church demanded they cling to their faith even as their flesh fell away. Priests and masks would perform mass, their voices echoing through the hollowed chambers. As the diseased congregation knelt in silence, half of them too weak to rise again. At night, the colony was filled with muffled cries, the scratching of infected wounds, the rasping breath of the dying, and the silence of those who simply never woke again. To the healthy townsfolk, lepers were walking corpses. Mothers told their children that if they stared too long into a leper's eyes, they would turn into one themselves. Merchants insisted that a leper's touch could rot wood, sour milk, or poison a well. Knights returning from the crusade swore they had seen lepers used as living weapons, catapulted over city walls to spread despair and terror. And so, laws grew harsher. In many regions, lepers were forbidden from entering towns or touching market goods. They had to wear bells or clappers to announce their approach. Some cities demanded they wear special clothing, long tunics with marks sewn onto them, or even masks shaped like grotesque faces to warn others away. A leper could not inherit land, marry, or even testify in court. To be accused of leprosy, even falsely, was to lose your humanity in a single breath. The colonies became places of rumor and legend. Townsfolk whispered of demons walking among the diseased, or of lepers secretly gathering in the night, plotting vengeance against the world that cast them out. To many, leper colonies were not hospitals, but hell on earth, and in many ways they were. Leprosy, today known as Hansen's disease, moved slowly, but in the Middle Ages, its cruelty seemed endless. It begins with numbness. A patch of skin loses its sensation. Then sores appear, ulcers that do not heal. Fingers twist, nerves die, feet bleed from unnoticed injuries. Faces deform into twisted masks of pain. Over years, the body becomes unrecognizable and the victim, trapped in her own skin, is consumed by suffering. But in medieval Europe, there was no science, no understanding of bacteria or nerve damage. To them, this was a corruption of the soul. Lepers were thought to spread sin itself, their very breath corrupting the pure. Some theologians claim they carried the sins of mankind, a punishment God inflicted on their flesh for the good of others. Inside the colonies, the victims of this disease could only watch as their neighbors fell apart, one by one. A man might wake to find his bunkmate's body cold beside him, rats already chewing at his sores. A mother might cradle her child, both marked by lesions, knowing she had passed down not life, but death. For the medieval leper, the body was a prison that rotted from within, and the colony was a coffin in which they waited for release. The camera drifts over the ruins of an old leper hospital, stone walls crumbling, vines swallowing what remains. These places still exist across Europe, silent echoes of suffering long past. Beneath the floors, archaeologists have uncovered mass graves, pits of bones that tell the story no chronicler dared to write. The truth is that medieval leper colonies were less about healing and more about containment. They were humanity's attempt to wall off fear, to bury the disease before death itself arrived. Few lepers ever escaped. Fewer still were remembered. Yet in their silence, they remind us of a brutal truth, that fear of the sick can be as dangerous as sickness itself. These colonies were not just prisons of flesh, but prisons of the human spirit, a warning from the past of what happens when fear triumphs over compassion. The screen fades to black. Narrator whispered, "In the Middle Ages, to live as a leper was to die every day. Outcast, cursed, and forgotten, trapped in a colony that was not a refuge, but a living hell. Not every leper truly had leprosy. Some were falsely accused. A jealous neighbor, a bitter rival, or a suspicious priest could whisper, 'I saw sores on his skin. I saw him cough blood.' In a world where fear ruled, suspicion was enough. Once branded, there was no return. The accused could lose land, inheritance, even their families. Their homes were sometimes burned to cleanse the corruption. Many who were exiled were perfectly healthy, but still sent to die in the colonies. For some, leprosy was not a disease, but a weapon, and the colonies swelled with both the afflicted and the unjustly damned. Inside the colony, life was a cycle of suffering. Food was scarce. Scraps tossed over walls, moldy bread, or thin stew made of roots and weeds. Fresh water was rare. Disease spread quickly, not only leprosy but dysentery, fevers, and infections. The cries of the dying echoed at night. Some prayed. Some cursed God. Others lay silently, too weak to move. In the morning, bodies were collected and thrown into mass graves. No funeral, no prayer, just another mound of dirt. And yet, the living endured. They carved wooden crosses, sang hymns, and even formed communities, bound together not by hope of recovery, but by shared misery. Outside the colonies, rumors spread like wildfire. People claimed lepers gathered in secret at night to worship demons, that they poison wells out of vengeance, that they conspire with enemies of the kingdom. During the Crusades, stories told of lepers being used as biological weapons, catapulted into besieged cities to spread terror. Chroniclers exaggerated, but the legends grew. To many, lepers were not just diseased. They were agents of Satan himself. These myths fueled even harsher persecution. Fear gave people permission to treat the diseased as less than human. To suffer leprosy was to live inside a body that slowly turned against you. Fingers curled until they snapped. Feet rotted until bones showed through. Blindness stole sight. Ulcers consumed the face until loved ones could no longer recognize the person beneath. But perhaps worse than the physical pain was the isolation. Families abandoned mothers, fathers, and children. A child born inside a leper colony rarely lived long. Those who did grew up knowing they would never leave. The body was a prison, and the colony was a coffin. Together, they formed a living hell.